The wind howled ominously around the imposing Blackwood Manor, a forgotten Victorian estate nestled in the heart of the shadowy English countryside. The thick morning fog clung to its towers and gargoyles like a ghostly shroud, concealing the secrets that lay dormant beneath its crumbling roof. On October 17th, little Lily, just 9 years old with honey-colored hair, vanished without a trace. Her parents, Arthur and Eleanor, were consumed by growing despair, while the local police, led by Inspector Davies, faced a deeply unsettling mystery. The only tangible clue was Lily's small bicycle, found abandoned near the dark, silent shores of the lake that bordered the property. A sense of unease hung over Blackwood, a place where the past seemed to whisper unspeakable secrets with every gust of wind. Before we delve into the chilling details of this case that echoed through the corridors of time, we kindly ask you to subscribe to our channel and let us know from which corner of the world you're watching this story. Your support helps us keep the flame of truth alive amid so many unsolved mysteries. Lily was a curious and lively child, with a vivid imagination that led her to explore every inch of the vast Blackwood estate. Her parents always encouraged her to play in the front gardens, where they could keep a close eye on her. However, in recent weeks, Lily had developed an unusual fascination with Silas, the manor's new gardener. A middle-aged man with a brooding expression and calloused hands, Silas kept mostly to himself in a small cottage at the far end of the property. He rarely spoke to the residents of the main house, which only deepened Lily's curiosity about the enigmatic figure. She would watch him from a distance as he tended to the withering rose bushes and battled the weeds that threatened to choke the once lush beauty of Blackwood's gardens. On the fateful morning of her disappearance, Lily asked her parents for permission to deliver a drawing she had made for Silas. Arthur and Eleanor hesitated. There was something unsettling about the reclusive gardener, an air of mystery they couldn't quite put into words. Yet Lily's sweet persistence and pleading eyes eventually wore them down. They agreed, but made her promise to simply hand over the drawing and return immediately. That was the last time they saw their daughter alive. Hours later, when they noticed her unusual delay, a frantic search began across the estate. All they found was her small bicycle by the lake's edge, its wheels slowly turning, like the final breath of hope. Inspector Davies and his team arrived at Blackwood by dusk, finding Arthur and Eleanor in a state of restrained hysteria. The mansion, with its Gothic architecture and shadowed windows, felt like something torn from a nightmare. The initial search of the surrounding grounds yielded no trace of Lily. The fog refused to lift, as if nature itself conspired to hide the truth. Silas was immediately questioned. His behavior during the interrogation was, at best, strange. He seemed evasive, his answers short and disconnected, his gaze avoiding direct contact. In a particularly disturbing moment, Silas suggested to Inspector Davies that the local roads should be blocked off, so the girl can't be taken too far. How could he be so sure Lily had been taken? That chilling question lingered in the cold air. As the hours dragged on, the mystery surrounding Lily's disappearance deepened. Witnesses began to come forward with fragmented and unsettling accounts. One woman, out walking her dog along the road near Blackwood, claimed to have seen Lily heading toward the back of the estate with Silas shortly before noon. A gardener from a neighboring property reported hearing heated arguments coming from Silas's cottage that same morning, though he couldn't identify the voices or the nature of the conversation. But it was the testimony of a young woman from a nearby village that cast the darkest shadow yet. She claimed to have seen Silas behaving suspiciously near the lake the week before Lily vanished, though she couldn't confirm if the girl was present. Each new statement added another layer of complexity to the case, weaving a web of suspicion around the solitary gardener. In the midst of the investigation, a shocking revelation shook the small local community. Disturbing photographs, allegedly of Lily, were found circulating on dark web forums, tied to child exploitation content. Authorities ramped up their efforts, working alongside cybercrime specialists to trace the source of the images. The discovery cast a grim light on the possibility that Lily's disappearance was linked to a far more dangerous and organized criminal network than anyone had initially feared. The name of a known offender in the region, a man named Alistair Finch, previously implicated in child abuse cases, began to surface in the precinct's corridors. However, no solid evidence directly connected Finch to Lily's disappearance or to Silas. The atmosphere of fear and uncertainty grew heavier with each passing day without news of the little girl. The pressure on Silas increased with each interrogation. Inspector Davies noticed the growing tension in the gardener's behavior. His hands trembled slightly as he answered the questions, and his vacant gaze occasionally fixed on a distant point, as if reliving a disturbing moment. The police conducted thorough searches of Silas's cabin and the areas around the lake, but found no conclusive forensic evidence directly linking the gardener to Lily's disappearance. However, small details did not escape the inspector's experienced eyes. A partially erased child's footprint near the cabin, a child's shirt button found beneath a fallen log near the lake, and a palpable nervousness emanating from Silas every time Lily's name was mentioned. The lack of a convincing alibi for the morning of the disappearance also weighed against him. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Lily's parents mentioned an old disagreement between Arthur and Silas. Years ago, before Silas was hired as a gardener, he had briefly worked on a neighboring property owned by a friend of Arthur's. There had been an incident involving the disappearance of some gardening tools, and Silas was dismissed under suspicion. Although there was never any concrete proof of his involvement, Arthur always harbored a latent distrust toward him. This information added a new layer of complexity to the case, raising the possibility of premeditated revenge. Could it be that old resentment had driven Silas to commit such a terrible act? Inspector Davies ordered a review of the files from that time, looking for any detail that might shed light on this old dispute. The analysis of images found on the dark web yielded inconclusive results. Although one of the photographs bore a disturbing resemblance to Lily, the image quality was poor and did not allow for definitive identification. IT specialists tracked the IP address of the upload, but it was masked, making it difficult to identify the source. However, the discovery confirmed the worst fears of Lily's parents and the local community: the possibility that the girl had fallen into the hands of predators. The police intensified the search for Alistair Finch, a criminal with a history of child abuse in the region, but he seemed to have vanished without a trace. The sense of powerlessness in the face of the potential cruelty behind Lily's disappearance loomed over the investigation like a sinister shadow. While the police pursued multiple lines of inquiry, the local community came together in the search for Lily. Volunteers organized exhaustive searches of the Blackwood property and the surrounding areas. Flyers with the smiling photograph of the girl were distributed throughout the region, and emotional appeals from her parents aired on local television. Hope, though faint, still lingered in the hearts of those who refused to believe the worst. However, as days turned into weeks with no sign of Lily, anguish and despair began to consume the small community. The once serene beauty of the English countryside now seemed tinged with deep and palpable sadness. A new witness emerged, bringing a report that cast an even darker shadow over Silas. A former employee of the Blackwood mansion, who had worked there many years earlier, recalled an incident involving the gardener and another child from the region. She reported that Silas had shown an unusual interest in small children, giving them small gifts and seeking their company in a way that made her uncomfortable at the time. While there was no evidence of any criminal behavior, the former employee's recollection painted a more sinister portrait of the reclusive gardener. Inspector Davies ordered this line of inquiry to be further investigated, seeking out others who might have had contact with Silas over the years. The pressure from the media and the community on the police increased by the day. The disappearance of a child was a crime that deeply shocked public conscience, and the lack of visible progress in the investigation generated frustration and outrage. Inspector Davies held several press conferences, maintaining a cautious tone and promising that all efforts were being made to find Lily. However, behind the scenes, the lack of concrete evidence and the enigmatic nature of Silas posed a significant challenge for the investigative team. The possibility that Lily might never be found loomed as a silent threat over all those involved in the case. In a final effort to obtain a confession or crucial clue, Inspector Davies confronted Silas with the new information gathered from witnesses and the disturbing discovery of the photos on the dark web. Silas's reaction was unexpected. Instead of denying or becoming defensive, he broke down in tears, muttering disjointed phrases about an accident and guilt. However, his words were vague and offered no concrete details about Lily's whereabouts. The inspector felt he was close to uncovering the dark truth behind the disappearance, but the final piece of the puzzle was still missing: the irrefutable proof that would link Silas to the fate of little Lily. What really happened on that fateful morning at Blackwood Mansion? The answer, no matter how terrifying, seemed on the verge of being revealed. Silas's tears during the final interrogation brought a new intensity to the investigation. Inspector Davies, sensing that the truth was about to emerge, ordered the gardener's cabin to be searched again, this time with even greater attention to detail. Every inch of the small space was meticulously examined by forensic experts. Beneath a loose floorboard, investigators found a hidden wooden box. Inside were some of Lily's belongings: the drawing she intended to give Silas, a small hair clip she used to wear, and most disturbing of all, a torn piece of fabric matching the dress Lily was wearing on the day of her disappearance. The discovery of these items seemed to incriminate Silas undeniably. Confronted with the new findings, Silas finally began to speak more coherently, though his account remained fragmented and filled with emotion. He admitted that Lily had come to his cabin that morning to give him the drawing. According to him, while they were playing in the garden near the cabin, a terrible accident occurred. He claimed Lily tripped and fell, hitting her head on a rock. Desperate and afraid of the consequences, Silas said he panicked and hid the girl's body. However, he refused to reveal the exact location, saying only that he had taken her to a safe place. Inspector Davies didn't fully believe Silas's version. There were many inconsistencies in his story, and the mention of the photos on the dark web hung over his words like a sinister shadow. The search for Lily's body intensified, focusing on the areas around Silas's cabin and the Blackwood property. Search dogs were brought in to assist, and teams of volunteers combed the dense forest surrounding the mansion. With each passing hour without finding the girl's body, the hope of finding her alive diminished drastically. The local community followed every development in the investigation with anxiety and sorrow. The idea that such a heinous crime could have occurred in their quiet rural region was difficult to accept. Silas, once merely a mysterious recluse, was now viewed with horror and disgust. While the search continued, the police turned their attention to Silas's past, looking for any information that might explain his disturbing behavior. They discovered he had a history of legal trouble, including petty theft and an incident involving inappropriate behavior with a child many years earlier, although he was never formally charged. These revelations reinforced the suspicion that Silas might be far more dangerous than he initially appeared. Inspector Davies began to consider the possibility that the accident Silas described was an attempt to cover up a much more serious crime. The investigation also focused on Alistair Finch, the known child abuser. Although there was no proven direct connection between Finch and Silas, the police didn't rule out the possibility that the two were somehow connected, or that Finch had taken advantage of the situation following Lily's disappearance. The search for Finch became a parallel priority to the search for the girl's body. The possibility of a child exploitation network being involved made the case even more urgent and terrifying. After days of exhaustive searching, Lily's body was finally found in a shallow grave in the forest, about a kilometer from Blackwood Mansion. The autopsy revealed that the cause of death was not a simple fall, as Silas had claimed. There were clear signs of cranial trauma, consistent with a heavy blow. The discovery confirmed Inspector Davies' suspicions. Lily had not died by accident. She had been the victim of violence. Silas's mask had fallen, revealing a far darker and more dangerous face. With the discovery of Lily's body and the results of the autopsy, the police formally arrested Silas on charges of murder. Confronted with the irrefutable evidence, the gardener finally confessed to the crime. However, his confession was filled with disturbing and shocking details. He admitted to having become enraged at Lily for entering his cabin without permission and violently assaulting her. He also confessed to taking photos of the girl after her death and selling them on the dark web for money. The revelation of such cruelty and depravity deeply shocked the community and turned the mystery of Lily's disappearance into an unimaginable nightmare. The Blackwood Mansion case had revealed a dark and terrifying secret that would haunt the peaceful English countryside forever. Silas's confession plunged the small English community into deep mourning and a wave of outrage. The brutality of the crime and the revelation of his involvement in child exploitation shocked everyone. Blackwood Manor, once a symbol of mystery, became a macabre place, laden with the sadness and violence that had occurred there. The police, now with the confessed murderer in custody, focused their efforts on gathering all the necessary evidence to ensure a conviction and on dismantling any possible child exploitation network linked to Silas. The search for Alastair Finch, who remained at large, became even more urgent. Silas's trial attracted national and international media attention. The story of little Lily and the cruelty of her murder moved the public. During the trial, even more disturbing details came to light. Silas revealed a history of repressed pedophilic behavior and that Lily's presence in his cabin had triggered his dark impulses. He described with chilling detachment the moments leading up to the crime, shocking everyone in court with his lack of remorse. Forensic evidence, including Lily's blood found in the cabin and fibers from her dress matching the piece of cloth discovered, corroborated Silas's confession. Silas's defense attempted to argue for mental insanity, presenting psychological reports describing an individual with severe personality disorders. However, the prosecution countered with its own experts, who stated that Silas was fully capable of understanding the nature of his actions and that he acted with premeditation and cruelty. The jury, composed of local citizens deeply affected by the case, deliberated for only a few hours before delivering the verdict: guilty of murder and child exploitation. The sentence was the maximum allowed under English law: life imprisonment. Justice, though delayed, had been served for Lily. However, Lily's case left deep scars on the community. Trust in the safety of the small town was shaken, and parents began to view neighbors and strangers with suspicion. The memory of Lily, a sweet and curious girl, became a tragic reminder of the fragility of innocence and the evil that can hide behind an apparently harmless facade. Blackwood Manor remained abandoned, a dark monument to a heinous crime, avoided by local residents who preferred to forget the horrors that had unfolded there. The search for Alastair Finch continued, but without success. Authorities believed he had fled the country, possibly seeking refuge within an international child exploitation network. The fear that other predators might still be at large in the region loomed like a dark cloud over the community. Lily's case served as a brutal warning about the need for constant vigilance and heightened protection for children. Years later, Lily Blackwood's case was still remembered in England as one of the most shocking and tragic crimes in recent history. The story of her disappearance and murder became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of the dangers that may lurk in the most unexpected places. Blackwood Manor remained in ruins, a silent testimony to an irreparable tragedy. But amid the sorrow and pain, Lily's memory also inspired the creation of foundations and organizations dedicated to child protection, a legacy of hope rising from the ashes of a terrible loss. But Lily Blackwood's story may not have ended with Silas's conviction. Years later, a private detective, hired anonymously, began reviewing the case files. He found intriguing inconsistencies in Silas's statement and in some of the evidence presented at trial. Small details that had gone unnoticed at the time began to raise new and disturbing questions. Could it be that Silas had not acted alone? Were there other dark secrets hidden under the shadow of Blackwood Manor? The truth, however shocking it might be, may not have fully come to light yet. The private detective, a man named Thomas Ashton, was known for his tenacity and his ability to uncover the truth in seemingly closed cases. As he delved into the Blackwood case files, he noticed subtle discrepancies that had escaped the original investigation's attention, which had been overwhelmed by the urgency of finding Lily and the brutality of the crime confessed by Silas. Ashton focused on the witness statements, revisiting every detail, every hesitation, every fragment of information that might have been overlooked. He realized that some accounts seemed conflicting or incomplete, suggesting that not all pieces of the puzzle fit perfectly. One of the inconsistencies that most intrigued Ashton was the testimony of the woman walking her dog who claimed to have seen Lily with Silas behind the property. In her original statement, She mentioned that Silas appeared agitated and that Lily seemed reluctant to follow him. However, this information had not been thoroughly explored by the police at the time. Ashton tracked down the witness, now an elderly woman living in a care home, and spoke with her at length. The woman recalled the incident in more detail, mentioning that there had been a third figure in the distance, near the forest, someone she couldn't clearly identify due to the distance and morning fog. This new information cast a shadow of doubt over the narrative that Silas and Lily had been alone. Another loose end that caught Ashton's attention was the analysis of the photos found on the dark web. Although the image quality was poor, Ashton managed to find a facial recognition expert who applied advanced analysis techniques. The result was surprising. Although there were similarities to Lily, there were also subtle differences in facial structure and some physical features. The possibility that the photos were not of Lily, or that another child had been involved, began to gain traction in Ashton's mind. This raised the question of who had taken and shared those photos, and what their connection might be to Lily's disappearance. Ashton also revisited the background of Alastair Finch, the criminal with a history of child abuse who had vanished during the original investigation. He discovered that Finch had ties to a child exploitation network operating across various parts of England, using the dark web to distribute content. Although there was no direct evidence linking Finch to Silas, Ashton didn't rule out the possibility of an indirect connection or that Finch had taken advantage of the situation after Lily's disappearance. Finch's absence and the uncertainty surrounding the photos created a far more complex scenario than the seemingly solved case of a murderous gardener. As Ashton delved deeper into the investigation, he began to suspect that Silas might have been a pawn in a much larger and more sinister game. Perhaps he had been coerced or manipulated by others involved in the exploitation network. Silas's confession, though detailed, could have been partially fabricated or influenced to protect others. The idea that the full truth about Lily's disappearance was still hidden drove Ashton to continue his relentless search for answers. Ashton spent weeks tracking down former contacts of Alastair Finch, following tenuous leads that led him down dark alleys and into secret meetings with shadowy individuals. He discovered that Finch had an obsession with old, isolated mansions, using them as sites for his heinous crimes. Blackwood Manor, with its sinister atmosphere and seclusion, fit this profile perfectly. Could it be that Finch had already been connected to the manor even before Silas's arrival? In a stroke of luck, Ashton found a former associate of Finch who agreed to speak anonymously. The information he revealed was shocking. Finch had known Silas for years and had manipulated him into working at Blackwood. Finch had a plan to use the manor for his own nefarious purposes and saw Silas as a useful pawn. Silas's confession, according to the source, had been partially orchestrated by Finch to divert attention from his own involvement. The truth behind Lily Blackwood's disappearance was about to take an even darker and more unexpected turn. The information provided by Alastair Finch's former associate opened a new and disturbing line of investigation for Thomas Ashton. The possibility that Silas had been manipulated and that Finch was the true mastermind behind Lily's disappearance required a complete re-evaluation of the case. Ashton returned to the police files, searching for any indication of a possible connection between Silas and Finch that might have been previously overlooked. He found a marginal note in one of the investigation reports mentioning a brief interaction between the two men years earlier at a bar in a neighboring town. The interaction had been considered insignificant at the time, but in light of the new revelations, it now carried a sinister weight. Ashton focused his efforts on tracking down Alastair Finch's current whereabouts. He used his contacts in the underworld and accessed unofficial databases, following a faint trail of information that led him across multiple cities and states. The image of Finch that emerged was that of a cunning and elusive predator, a master at hiding and manipulating those around him. His obsession with isolated locations and his preference for vulnerable children created a terrifying profile that fit perfectly with the circumstances surrounding Lily's disappearance. While Ashton pursued Finch's trail, he also delved deeper into Silas's past. He discovered that the gardener was a lonely and easily influenced man, with a history of mental health issues and a desperate need for acceptance. It was plausible that Finch had exploited these vulnerabilities to manipulate him and use him in his twisted plans. Silas's confession, although containing elements of truth, might have been distorted or incomplete, omitting Finch's central role in the crime. Ashton returned to Blackwood Manor, determined to find any evidence that might have been left behind and could link Finch to the property. He spent days combing through the grounds of the mansion, exploring every dark corner and every abandoned structure. In an old shed at the back of the property, hidden beneath loose floorboards, Ashton made a macabre discovery: a collection of photographs and videos of children, including some that appeared to be of Lily. There were also detailed notes about the girl's habits and routines, written in handwriting that did not match Silas's. This shocking discovery pointed unequivocally to someone else's involvement in the crime. Ashton brought the new evidence to the police, who were initially skeptical, having considered the case closed with Silas's confession and conviction. However, Ashton's persistence and the strength of the new findings convinced them to reopen the investigation. The police began working in collaboration with Ashton, using their resources and authority to pursue the new leads. The search for Alastair Finch intensified, with arrest warrants issued for kidnapping, child exploitation, and suspected murder. News of the Blackwood case being reopened spread quickly, reigniting pain and outrage in the local community. The possibility that Silas had not acted alone and that another monster was still at large was deeply unsettling. Lily's memory resurfaced with renewed intensity, and the pursuit of justice gained new momentum. Once again, Blackwood Manor became the center of attention, a place where dark secrets refused to stay buried. As the police intensified the manhunt for Finch, Ashton continued his own parallel investigation, feeling that pieces of the puzzle were still missing. He was convinced that the full truth about Lily's fate and Finch's role had yet to be uncovered. A dark intuition told him that the horror behind the Blackwood case was even deeper and more complex than anyone imagined, and that the key to solving the final mystery might be hidden in an unexpected place. Guided by his dark intuition, Thomas Ashton turned his attention to the less obvious details of the Blackwood case. He revisited the crime scene photographs, analyzing every object, every shadow, every detail that might have gone unnoticed. One photograph in particular caught his attention. An image of Silas's cabin after Lily's body was discovered. In a dark corner of the image, almost hidden by the shadow of a tree, Ashton noticed a small, shiny object. Using forensic software to enhance the image, he was able to identify the object as a rare type of keychain, made of silver and bearing a peculiar engraving. Ashton conducted an exhaustive investigation into the keychain, consulting jewelry experts and collectors of antique items. He discovered that the keychain belonged to a limited edition set distributed years ago by an exclusive club for enthusiasts of rare artifacts. The club's member list was confidential, but Ashton managed to obtain access through a contact. To his surprise, Alastair Finch's name was on the list. This discovery established a direct connection between Finch and the crime scene, strengthening the theory of his central involvement in Lily's disappearance. With this new crucial evidence, Ashton confronted the police once again. This time, their initial skepticism had vanished, replaced by a renewed sense of urgency. The discovery of Finch's keychain at the crime scene was irrefutable proof that he had been present at Silas's cabin and was therefore directly linked to Lily's murder. The manhunt for Finch intensified even further, with red alerts issued to law enforcement agencies across the country and abroad. The investigation then focused on uncovering how Finch had manipulated Silas and what his exact plan was for using Blackwood Manor. Through testimonies from Finch's former acquaintances, police learned of his morbid fascination with isolated properties and his plan to transform Blackwood into a secret site for his heinous crimes. Silas, with his solitary nature and financial desperation, had been the perfect target for Finch's schemes. Finch had convinced him to work at the manor, promising him a share of the profits from his illegal activities. Silas's confession, now re-examined, appeared to be a desperate attempt to protect himself and possibly protect Finch, perhaps out of fear or some form of coercion. The details he omitted, the inconsistencies in his account, and his evasive behavior during interrogations now made much more sense in light of Finch's involvement. The police began reconstructing the true timeline of events, with Finch as the central figure and Silas as either a reluctant accomplice or a victim of manipulation. The search for Alastair Finch culminated in a police operation at a remote house on the coast of Scotland, a location matching the pattern of hideouts he typically used. Finch was arrested without resistance. In his possession, the police found further incriminating evidence, including more photographs of Lily and detailed notes outlining his plans to exploit other children. Finch's arrest brought relief to the community and to Lily's parents, who finally saw justice drawing near. However, during Finch's interrogation, a shocking new twist shook the case. Finch claimed he had not acted alone. He mentioned the existence of a third individual, a shadowy, influential figure who had funded and guided his criminal activities. Finch refused to reveal this person's identity, but his words cast a sinister cloud over the investigation, suggesting that the horror behind Lily Blackwood's disappearance might have even deeper and darker roots. Once again, the full truth seemed to be slipping through the investigators' fingers. Alastair Finch's claims about a third party involved cast a wave of apprehension over the investigation. Who could this shadowy figure be, capable of financing and guiding Finch's heinous crimes? The police intensified their interrogation of Finch, using every technique available to extract the identity of his mysterious accomplice. However, Finch remained obstinate, revealing only enigmatic and contradictory fragments, as though playing a sinister game with the investigators. He described this person as someone above the law, with powerful connections and a dark influence that extended through unsuspecting sectors of society. As the police struggled to decipher Finch's evasive words, Thomas Ashton followed his own line of investigation, diving into Alastair Finch's dark past in search of any clue that might reveal the identity of his mysterious partner. Ashton discovered that Finch had been involved with elitist social circles in his youth, frequenting exclusive clubs and maintaining contact with wealthy and influential individuals. Could it be that his accomplice belonged to this select circle, using their position to protect Finch and profit from his crimes? Ashton began investigating the members of the Antique Artifact Enthusiast Club that Finch belonged to, the same organization that had provided the keychain found at the crime scene. He gathered information about the most influential and discreet members, searching for any behavioral patterns or indirect connections to Finch. The task was arduous, as these people were masters at keeping their private lives out of the public eye. However, Ashton was persistent and knew that the key to unraveling the mystery could lie in some seemingly insignificant detail. The police, following one of the leads provided by Finch, began investigating suspicious financial transactions linked to offshore accounts. They uncovered large sums of money being moved anonymously, with transfers that coincided with periods when Finch was planning or executing his crimes. The trail of money seemed to lead to a single ultimate beneficiary, whose identity was protected by a complex network of shell companies. The sense that there were dark forces at play, far beyond Finch himself, was intensifying. As the investigation slowly advanced toward the mysterious third party, an unexpected event occurred. Silas, who was serving his life sentence, was found dead in his cell. The official cause of death was suicide, but Ashton had his doubts. Was it possible that Silas had been silenced to protect the identity of Finch's accomplice? This dark possibility hovered over the investigation, adding an extra layer of urgency to the need to uncover the full truth. Silas's death caused Ashton to double down on his efforts. He felt time was running out and that the true mastermind behind the horror of the Blackwood case might escape justice. Ashton focused on one of the most influential and discreet members of the Antique Artifact Club, a business magnate with an impeccable reputation and connections at every level of society. There were vague rumors of a dark side to his life, whispers of involvement in illicit activities, but nothing had ever been proven. Ashton decided to break the facade of respectability surrounding this man and uncover the truth behind his apparent integrity. In a bold move, Ashton managed to obtain confidential documents revealing secret financial transactions between the magnate and companies linked to Alastair Finch. The evidence was circumstantial, but pointed to an undeniable connection. Ashton brought the information to the police, who reluctantly agreed to begin a formal investigation into the magnate. The Blackwood case, which seemed to have reached its conclusion with Finch's arrest, was about to open up once again, revealing even more shocking and disturbing secrets in the shadows of the English elite. The investigation into the business magnate, Arthur Blackwood, unrelated to the mansion, began discreetly, led by a special police team assigned to high-complexity cases. Blackwood's impeccable reputation and powerful connections required extreme caution and secrecy. Thomas Ashton actively collaborated with the team, providing the information he had gathered and sharing his insights into Alastair Finch's manipulative personality and the possible dynamics between the two men. The police began a meticulous analysis of Blackwood's finances, tracking cash flows and searching for any transactions that could confirm his involvement with Finch and his criminal activities. As the investigation progressed, disturbing evidence began to emerge. Secret accounting documents revealed regular payments of large sums of money from shell companies linked to Blackwood to accounts controlled by Finch. Testimonies from former associates of Finch, breaking their silence out of fear or promises of protection, confirmed that Finch often mentioned a powerful benefactor who financed and protected him. The description of this benefactor, though vague, matched the figure of Arthur Blackwood. The police also discovered that Arthur Blackwood had an obsessive interest in ancient artifacts and a history of sadistic and manipulative behavior in his personal relationships. Some reports mentioned a sick fascination with children and a need to exert control over others. These revelations painted a dark portrait of the magnate, far removed from his public image as a respectable philanthropist. The final piece of the puzzle seemed to be falling into place, revealing a web of corruption and depravity at the highest echelons of society. With the evidence mounting, the police obtained a search warrant for Arthur Blackwood's residence, an imposing mansion on the outskirts of London. The search revealed a secret basement, hidden behind a bookshelf, where more photographs and videos of children were found, some of which appeared to have been taken in the original Blackwood mansion. There were also detailed notes about Finch's plans and veiled references to Blackwood's involvement in his activities. The discovery was shocking and confirmed the investigators' worst fears. Arthur Blackwood was arrested and interrogated. Initially, he vehemently denied any involvement with Alastair Finch or the disappearance of Lily Blackwood. However, confronted with the irrefutable evidence found in his home, his facade of respectability began to crumble. In a moment of rage and desperation, Blackwood confessed to financing Finch's activities and benefiting from his crimes. He revealed that he shared Finch's perverse interest in children and had used his wealth and influence to protect him for years. However, he denied any direct involvement in Lily's death, blaming Finch for the murder. Arthur Blackwood's confession brought to light an even darker and more disturbing truth about the case. Lily's death had not been just the act of a disturbed gardener or a cruel pedophile. There had been a greater power behind it, an influential and seemingly respectable figure who had orchestrated and benefited from the horror. Blackwood's arrest sent shockwaves through English society, exposing the rot that could hide beneath the mask of the elite. But the case was still not completely closed. There remained the question of Silas's death in prison. Could it truly have been suicide? Or had he been silenced by Blackwood's orders to prevent him from revealing the full truth? Thomas Ashton was determined to find the answer to this final question, feeling that full justice for Lily Blackwood would only be achieved when all the dark secrets were finally uncovered. The shadow of the Blackwood mansion still loomed, carrying with it the promise of more shocking revelations. Silas's death in prison continued to haunt Thomas Ashton. Although authorities had declared it a suicide, the private detective couldn't dismiss the possibility of a murder orchestrated by Arthur Blackwood to protect his own secrets. Ashton began a parallel investigation into Silas's death, reviewing the autopsy reports, interviewing other inmates and prison staff, looking for any inconsistencies or signs that something didn't fit the official narrative. He discovered that Silas had shown signs of fear and anxiety in the days leading up to his death, mentioning to other prisoners that he feared for his life. This information raised serious doubts about the suicide version. Ashton also discovered that Arthur Blackwood had connections within the prison system, individuals who could have acted on his behalf to silence Silas. The possibility of a commissioned murder loomed like a sinister shadow over the investigation. If Silas had been killed, it meant he knew much more than he had revealed, and that Blackwood was willing to do anything to protect the truth. The need to unravel this last mystery became Ashton's top priority. With the help of an investigative journalist, Ashton was able to gain access to confidential information suggesting irregularities in the investigation of Silas's death. There was evidence that the crime scene had not been properly isolated and that some key witnesses had not been adequately questioned. These details pointed to a possible attempt to cover up the truth about Silas's death. Ashton was increasingly convinced that the gardener had been silenced. The pressure from Ashton and the media finally led authorities to reopen the investigation into Silas's death. A new autopsy was conducted, and additional forensic evidence was discovered, suggesting that the death had not been a suicide. There were signs of a struggle and traces of an unidentified substance in his body. The shocking conclusion was that Silas had been murdered. The news of the twist in Silas's death further rocked the Blackwood case, exposing the extent of the corruption and violence surrounding it. Confronted with the new evidence, Arthur Blackwood finally confessed to ordering Silas's death in prison. He feared that Silas, consumed by guilt or pressured by authorities, might reveal even more damning details about his involvement in the crimes. Blackwood's confession revealed the depth of his evil and his determination to protect his secrets at any cost. With this final confession, all the links in the chain of horror surrounding Lily Blackwood's disappearance and death were finally connected. Arthur Blackwood's final trial was an emotional and outraged event. The evidence of his heinous crimes and his involvement in Silas's death was irrefutable. The jury found him guilty of all charges, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice, though delayed and marred by tragedy, had finally been served for Lily Blackwood. However, the shadow of the Blackwood mansion never fully disappeared. Lily's story served as a grim reminder of the evil that can hide beneath the facade of respectability and the importance of never giving up the search for the truth, no matter how dark and terrifying it may be. And so, the truth about the dark secret of the Blackwood mansion was finally revealed, leaving behind a legacy of pain, but also a final triumph of justice over darkness.